Got the recording going?
Great. Okay, so I think I was going to start with kind of the current site, because the whole project is kind of I'm changing horses in the middle of the stream right now. So this is the way the site looks now. It's kind of a traditional database-backed CMS. And I was going to kind of go over this and then how it got here and then the problems that led me to start over from scratch. And then we'll get into the new site and Pollen and Racket and Fossil and make files and whatever else you guys want to talk about. So
one top level question.
Sure.
There do seem to be a whole web of Joel sites. And so how does the local yarn fit into that taxonomy or collection?
Yeah, I think I'll incorporate that question as I navigate the preamble here, I guess. This is the way the site looks now. If I can get this little preview window out of my way here. I found, just as we were talking here, this is what it looked like in 2003. So I actually started a website in 1998 on a free hosting service, just like probably everybody else my age in America, and or every other nerd anyway. And I don't have a snapshot of that because I didn't think to get one, but this is what it looked like by this point. I was still editing this in a text editor. There's no database here. You can see I'm kind of looking, I'm publishing issues. So I think of myself as a magazine, even back then. It's very spare, and there's a lot of this stuff that is carried over. If I look a little later, I think this is what it kind of evolved to later on. I went very monochrome, and this was what it looked like after I had, I wonder if I can get to this page still. So at some point in 2004, I got in touch with a guy online named Dean Allen, who has since passed away. Some of you might know who he is. He was a book designer, and he taught typography and stuff, and he came up with a CMS called Textpattern. And so Textpattern used to be kind of one of the candidates alongside WordPress and Movable Type and Blogspot, to where you could publish a site with a database in the back. So that was how I got into PHP and learning all this web server stuff. So that's what happened here. And then I kept that same thing in place later on, and that Textpattern CMS is still what's powering this version of the website. So at this point, jdueck.net was my URL. If you type that in now, you'll be transported to the localyarn.com. So I decided I wanted something that wasn't, I guess, so tied to my personal identity that it couldn't be other things. Joel's Improved Personal website, that was kind of cute. And so I came up with this identity of the local yarn. So the local yarn is my thing. It's kind of, I'm mostly the only one who's ever written for it. I did envision that maybe at some point I would publish other people who wanted to be on it. And that's still kind of an idea that I have, but I changed that to the local yarn. There are other sites that I'll get to. The only other personal one that I have now, I decided I did need something that was personal, so I came with joeldueck.com. This is, I wrote this in a text editor. It's just a single page. I think the CSS file is a separate file, but just all the things I can do, all my bookmarks, all my projects are on that one page. And from 2004 to 2018, the site looked like basically my favorite site ever. I made it this way on purpose. Really like that old GeoCity style. I had links and embeds from every other thing. I had all these dumb under constructions things. This is exactly like how I remember the web from 1998. So I did think to keep a snapshot of that before I made it slightly less dorky, I guess. So yeah, at some point in, I think probably it was close to when I got married, I redesigned this into this. And when I was doing that, I started to think about, so by this point, this is probably 2011, so I've been blogging for maybe a little over a decade at that point. And I had some stuff from a long time ago, and some of that stuff made it onto this site. And most of it's not that interesting, but occasionally I'd see something that would remind me of the old thing, and I'd want to update it a little bit. But my frustration with the blog is you go to update the old thing, you might as well just never do it because nobody's ever going to see it. It's at the bottom of the time stream. If I go to the archives here, come up here and go all the way to the bottom. I've got some stuff in here from 2000. Nobody's ever going to see that stuff. I'm going to see it because I like browsing my own website. We all like browsing our own websites, but I kind of wanted, I don't know, I thought if it's interesting to me, maybe it'd be interesting to somebody else. I wrote, so I'm 19 years old. I wrote this, I cut and pasted basically a bunch of Shakespeare's lines and into a Winnie the Pooh story. And this is one of the few things that I'm still like a little bit proud of from that age. And so in 2014, somebody else wrote, I found that somebody else had written a mashup of Milne and Rudyard Kipling. And so I was like, oh, this is kind of an interesting footnote to this old thing. And I added it as a comment on my own site. I basically reused Textpattern's commenting functionality. And to this day, I'm still far and away the author of most of the comments on my website. And I've been using them to just collect updates. And so I thought that was I feel like one of my original contributions to blogging was just to make, instead of comments being a discussion, because I don't have the audience, nobody wants to comment on my website, but I do. So I decided to turn on the commenting functionality and just write the comments myself, only when they were interesting, or they were relevant little footnotes to whatever I'd written. And awesome. Then I did end up opening that up to other people. So you can go on here and you can type in Markdown and get a preview. But because I wanted other people to use my comments the same way I do, I have all these demands, I guess. I don't want you to feel like, oh, hey, thanks, great site, or whatever. I want people to write things that are like high signal kind of, like they're submitting a note for publication onto the original. I don't know if anyone of you have been to Ed Tufte's visualization of information seminar. It's funny how these guys, Christopher Alexander, Ed Tufte, they have these fantastic informational architectures but they're terrible at websites. Like one of the sites that I want to see, I want to redo it myself, actually, if I could do it without being sued, but Christopher Alexander's pattern language website, if you've ever seen it, is atrocious.
It's really bad.
I mean, if there was ever a prime project for Pollen, which we'll get to later, I feel like that would be the thing, but I don't know. I don't have any hope that these people care enough, I guess. The book is the main thing for them, and then it's like, oh, I guess we'll have to do a website. But if you've been to Ed Tufte's website, and he has these ET notebooks, this is what his blog looks like. It's the ugliest thing in the world. You pick, let's see. I'm just going to pick one at random here. The asterisk ones are probably good. So he talks about a topic, and then you scroll down, and then there's these comments. And Ed Tufte has an approach to comments that I felt like was similar to where I was trying to go, which is that he only approves them if they have something new to say, something original, and he even will go back and delete a bunch of old ones later on. So if you get one in, it might not be there later on. So he's constantly curating, and he has the audience to where he has a lot of comments that he can curate. But so when where am I at here? I'll come back into something else. So when I set up this, sorry, I'm clicking around here, trying to find the thing where I was. Oh yeah, here. So trying to guide people into a similar mindset. And some people actually really got it well. I published this in 2013. This was a little blog typey post about, because I grew up in, well, that was the other thing about this site, is that I personally have changed a lot since I started it. So I don't need to get into it, but I used to be extremely religious. Now I'm really not that religious. I used to think one way about politics, and I think another way about, pretty much disagree with just about everything I thought when I was 19. And I have all these blog posts of me saying things that I no longer agree with. So what do I do with those? You know, what do I just delete them and just pretend they never happened? I don't like to do that, but I also don't like them being out there as a representation of a person that I no longer am. This blog post, I grew up with a lot, you know, so I was kind of in the religious thing. This was a diagram that was kind of drilled into us. We can create diagrams of our inner minds and all this stuff. And, you know, lots of other traditions have these too. Here's a pretty elaborate one that I never heard of before. Wow. So I wrote this thing about how I feel like it's, the position of the piece is that it's kind of pointless to try and make diagrams of our psyches that pretend like they're objective maps. And one of my readers submitted this fantastic, to me, footnote or note where he had all his own footnotes and cited all his own sources. And this is like, yes, this is exactly what I'm going for here, Mark Adams. And that was the only one that was ever to that level. But I feel like the potential is still there. So, but then still, it's still a very old post. And how are people going to see this? He happened to have posted this shortly after I wrote it, but how are people going to see it? So I managed to cobble together some code to, if you go to the blog, you'll actually see, here, this is a comment. So if you get a comments approved, it actually shows up in the blog, like right alongside of everything else. It actually looks like a blog post. And I try and link to, you know, the person's, I try and keep it so that the person gets some credit. And I think there is, oh yeah, I found a way, I have a subtle way of here if people want to know what this is about. The above note is added to an earlier post. You click on that, you get the link to my pet issue about how none of the players on the Minnesota baseball and football and hockey teams ever come from the state. So they don't really represent us. They're just corporate entities that, so I feel like, so I wrote this thing about how we should treat them like the Olympics. You can only be on the team if you were born there, you graduated high school there. It's a strong opinion weekly held, but anyways. So that was my other innovation was getting these notes kind of in the blog. And again, since I have such a low traffic site relative to Kottke or any of these other greats, I can do that and it's not going to overwhelm any of my actual writing. So that was the other thing. Where am I at in my notes here? Okay. The other thing was, some of you might have seen this already. I was able to create a keyword index, and on this site, it's kind of a big long column. And I had been faithfully keeping tags of all these posts without really knowing what I was going to use them for. And at some point, I figured out what I wanted to use them for this. I wanted an index that looks like a book. And so if somebody ever happened on this, they could just, this is another way of helping people stumble upon old things. So, you know, it's like chain shaking, what's that about? It's just a number, but you get a poem, you know. So it's just kind of a way of organizing or helping people stumble on things that doesn't depend on the time order in which they were published.
What do the numbers correspond to? So
the numbers actually are nothing more than the row IDs in the SQL database of the articles themselves. So they're not, they end up being semi-permanent, but if I were to regenerate the site somehow, they'd probably get all different numbers. But that was kind of a convenient way that I wrote the thing. It's like, oh, I can select the row ID. That'll kind of look like a page number. And there's a lot of them. So, and that's kind of still the approach I'm taking in the new site. There is a little bit of database involved. we can have a little bit of database as a tree done. And then the other two things were what I call series. Now, Textpattern has, we can go into, do I have it up here still? Yeah, so this is Textpattern. This is what it looks like behind the scenes. You can go to, when you log in, you get this very blog posty. You can write a title, you can write a body. I have a bunch of custom fields over here. This is where I keep all of my keywords, which I'm repurposing for the book index. The keywords, by default, they get collapsed into lowercase, so I hacked a thing where if you put a number sign in front of a number, in front of a word, it'll uppercase the next letter. So if I want to put somebody's name, I don't have to do that in the new system, but hey, it worked. Where was I going? So one of the things you can have is a category. So you can have a bunch of categories here. But the thing about blog categories is that they are just kind of labels. Where am I at here? So you can go to the, you can go to the poetry category and you'd see all the things. But how do you get that category to kind of have its own? If I want to write something about that category, I started calling them series to differentiate them from categories in my own mind. So the series, each of them presents its this one's broken, it's a bad example, but it presents its content in a different way. So this one will present it in one way. If I go back, let's see here, what a good one is this. Back in Windows days, there was the marquee screensaver. You could type in only up to 256 characters. So I wrote all these stories that are exactly 256 characters long, and then I put them in my blog. So I wanted these to look a little different. So in my mind, a series is kind of like a little bit of like a blog-like category, just kind of on steroids a little bit. It has its own presentation details. It has its own, it might have its own writing. In fact, the notes on the local yarn itself are a series. So they just present the links in a kind of a short form at the bottom. These are all the ones in that category or series, but I have a separate bit of writing above here that I wanted that didn't really fit into any of those. So, so series was the other thing. I've always been kind of fascinated with changes and updates, and errata is one of my things. It's kind of a print term for after a book is published, if there are corrections to be made, they'll go ahead and maybe put an insert in or add an extra couple of pages where it's too expensive to retypeset the whole book, but hey, you, the reader, should know that we changed this or that. So I had a separate thing called errata, and I always wanted this. This is just all the dumb little background changes that I made to the site, and I wasn't even consistent about doing it, but I tried to capture them in here. And I try not to write about writing too much because it's kind of a, it's,
yeah,
I don't know, it feels cheap to do, but it's fun. So if I could do it in an out-of-the-way place where people could find it if they wanted it, then that felt like I could have let myself do that. So, so that's where I put. So I've always kind of liked the idea of changes, tracking changes to things, and so that's one of the ideas that's here. I'm trying to evolve for the next version of the website.
This might be something you get to later, but like when you first started writing this in '98, was all the elements that you're taking from like books and the index page, the errata, were books a thing you really wanted to emulate back then, or like did that evolve over time?
It's a good question. I think back when I started, I probably brought I guess a book sensibility. Right back when I started, I was 17 years old. I was going through kind of a Charles Dickens phase. So I thought of myself as one of these highfalutin, Pecksniffian periodicals, that you might find a printout of in a pub or something. But, so I think there was that to begin with, I guess. But the actual intersection of books and the web didn't really come until much later.
Gotcha.
And yeah, but I've always felt like it was fun when I encountered a web experience that brought me a print-like features. So I've always, we all just kind of trawl through the internet and we're picking up things that we like and they're sticking to us and we're trying to redo them and without being too obvious about it. That's what I'm kind of doing here.
Awesome.
So let's see here. So this actually is, I really like this site still. It's been a few years since I've actually written on it regularly because I've gotten diverted. Well, first of all, I had kids. That really derailed me. I'm just now starting to get my brain back. And don't get me wrong, I love my kids and everything, but when I was 18, I had scads of, I could sit down and work on something for 3 hours, and that just does not happen anymore. I don't have the energy for it. By the time I'd have the time, I don't have the energy. By the time I have the energy, I don't have the time. It's just really ridiculous. But then also, what energy I had, I wanted to pursue into making the next thing. So actually coding the next version of the site has really stood in for me as a creative outlet way more than actually writing. And I have come to realize that I much prefer to publish things than to actually write them. So if you guys want to write something and send it my way, I mean, I'd probably throw it up on here. I'm picky and I'll probably play the editor to you, but that's part of the fun for me is really publishing stuff. And the sad part is that I have to actually pretend to be a writer instead of an editor when I'm doing this. I think all of us who are on this, like, we probably all fit that. We don't have a word for publishers the way we do for writers. We like to publish things, or we wouldn't be on the web, but we can't call ourselves publishers because that already means something else.
Yeah.
I'm still looking for that word.
Well, I have a question. Was there a time that you knew, I suppose in the beginning you probably started writing, and then was there a time where you knew that, oh my gosh, I think I'm actually enjoying the publishing side and the
hacking.
The hacking more than the actual writing itself?
Yes, that time was September 9th, 2015. This is when it gelled for me. Like, I don't know what to call myself. So that was probably that's one of the times I could actually put a date on that. That's
amazing.
Yeah. Publishing nerds is what I called it because I don't know what to call them. But I think publishing as an amateur pursuit is really a thing. And I don't think it really was a thing before the web. Maybe, you've had zines, I guess, would be one thing. But you couldn't, it was never this easy to get a printing press and publish something. So I think we're well into an era now where this publishing enthusiasm exists, but it doesn't really still have a name because it's not that common. It's not as common as writing. I think a lot of publishing nerds still think that they're writers. I came to accept, another reason I haven't written very much is just because this is going to sound silly and self-deprecating, but the more I got out on the web and the more I was on Twitter and the older I got, the more I realized I really didn't have anything original to say. Most of what I'm going to say has been said by somebody else. So that kind of took the wind out of my sails for a little while. I might have something original to say by the time I'm done with this new site. But I like making the code has really been fun for me. So
I can definitely strongly relate to that sentiment, and I'm sure a bunch of people here can.
And then you get into GitHub and I just really like the experience of sharing your work and everything. So that's my ideal social network is a social network based on making stuff. So so this, I really like this. I like the look of it. It works okay. I don't really have, I know, even though the next version of the site is statically generated, I'm not like strongly opinionated on statically generated sites versus, a database backed CMS. In fact, this has everything I publish on here is cached. So in the strictest sense, it's a static site that's backed by a database. I mean, if you go to one of these pages, oops, not that one. If you go to one of these pages, this came to you from a static file on a hard disk because it was cached. So a lot of people have philosophical purist things of, well, text shouldn't live in a database, it should live in a file. It's all files. It's just a matter of what do you want to do with it. So I do like this one, but it did have limitations that started to get me thinking about another way to do things, trying to look for other solutions. One of them was this whole notion of making books. So I don't know off the top of my head when it started. Maybe I can pull the same trick I did before, but I started writing things about how do I make a book? How do I, because websites are so ephemeral, and I'm getting to be 30, I'm getting to be 40. How am I gonna, someday, I'm not gonna have patience for all this web server stuff, for my personal stuff the rest of my life. How do I, when on the day comes when I'm just like, screw it, I'm turning it all off, I wanna still have something to show for that. So, and books to me, return to books with a kind of obvious answer. But when that time comes, I kind of want to already have the book. I don't want to have to go and copy and paste everything into InDesign. I don't want to, I don't want it to be so fiddly that I end up having to redo everything. I kind of want to already have the book. So I started going down that route. I started going down that route with moving into Markdown. That was one of the reasons Textpattern didn't really survive, is because Dean Allen made, this was before Markdown, he made a markup language called Textile. You can see it over here. Textile is basically HTML shorthand. So to make a level 3 heading, you do H3 period. This, if you want, it's similar with bold. I think I haven't used Textile in so long. I actually hacked Textpattern to use Markdown at some point so that I wouldn't have to use Textile, because none of the writing tools that are out there support Textile for obvious reasons. It's kind of HTML shorthand. I can't remember if there's I'll find a link and put it in the notes for you, Jared. But
awesome.
So I shifted everything over to Markdown. That's how I started with that, but it got to be pretty fiddly. So the other limitation was, let's see here. Well, that leads me into my next one, actually. The stuff I wanted to make, I got frustrated with Markdown pretty quickly for this purpose. If you're writing a novel, Markdown was probably fine, because you don't really need much. But as you guys may have run into, let's say you want a spot illustration and you want to float it to the right. Now, how do you do that? Well, there is no way to do that in standard Markdown other than to use HTML. And that works fine. There are a lot of, there's Common Mark now, there's Markdown Extra, Multi-Markdown, and all these, and then there's art editors that support those formats, and they all kind of have their own opinions about what they're going to support in their syntax highlighting and their previews and all this stuff. So, and then when it comes time to translate it into something that will typeset nicely in a book, which LaTeX is pretty much the only game in town until very recently, then if your Markdown has HTML in it, Pandoc is not going to translate that HTML into the correct LaTeX equivalent. So even as I was hacking Textpattern to do what I wanted it to do with Markdown, I could get some good results, but it had to be, the input had to be pretty simple.
Yeah.
I kind of got frustrated with the hackiness of the code the thing that I was making. If I can show you here. So Textpattern has articles, and then you have pages, which are like the templates. And it has its own little XML variant. So you can have conditionals inside here. where did so the blog page, I actually have within this PHP-based CMS, I have an XML variant that does a SQL query that transforms something using XSLT, which is a kind of a juju from the early 2000s that I don't fully understand, but somebody on the forums helped me kind of cobble it together to where XSLT is like a language for transforming XML documents. That's, you know, so you can see my frustration. I'm cooking things that I don't myself fully understand, and it just doesn't feel great. It got me to where I was, but if I ever wanted to customize anything further, I would be afraid of it exploding on me. A small frustration I have with the CMS approach is one that actually Venkat Rao, who is how I found Tom Critchlow, who was how I ended up here.
Yep.
He has blogged about this recently, which is that you go to there and you go to write and wants to type in a title. I don't want to type in a title for everything. Not everything I write needs a title. Sometimes I just want to write when I go to Twitter, I don't write a title for every tweet. Why should I write a title for everything that I put in here? I could put something in and then not use it, I guess. But I feel like, Venkat's approach to this was just, you know, he's just going to type in MGR and then a number. I don't know how he arrives at the number, but it just kind of, it still shows up on the page. So, yeah, you can hear the kids probably. They're having a great time. So that was a small frustration. I wanted to find a way to get away from that paradigm. If I not to have to use it if I didn't want it. And then this whole thing of errata tracking changes. I actually, in my mind, the ideal is to have every edit to every post be visible. So you should be able to go back to, and I tried to do something like this on my site where, let's see if I can find it. I can find it just by going all the way to the bottom, probably. Oops. Why America Should Conquer Canada. So I wrote this in 99, I was 18, and I wrote it. You can tell I was going through my Dickens phase. But now I'm, you know, so however many years, 12 years after this, I married somebody from Canada. And I also found out that I'm a Canadian citizen by birth because my dad was born in Canada. So not to mention the fact that over 10 years, I'm not a dumb high school student anymore. So I got so much hate mail from over the years. It was really delightful from Canadians who thought this was serious. And I don't actually, in retrospect, blame them for getting angry because this is not very well written satire. So if it was going to be satire, you know, it would kind of make a point, but it's just kind of dumb. So what do I do with this article? This is one of those things I was talking about. Do I delete it? Do I just pretend it never happened? Do I leave it out there representing me to the world, prospective employers, everyone? And so I decided to use my commenting thing saying, look, this is a dumb post. I get it now. Actually here, yeah, so I wrote a follow-up post here, but I added this later on. And I think I hacked a way to put in an asterisk here, and there are better ways to do this than what I did, but you know, you could just, I think I used a custom field or something like this, just so that people would say, oh, this is old, this is out of date, it's still here, but it happened, but it's not quite the thing anymore. And I wanted better tools for managing those kinds of changes for a personal site, for me, for things that are old. If my attitude about it changes, or I get new information, or let's say I make a prediction and it turned out to be true, I want a big star, then I couldn't really, I wanted a better way to do that. So those are the big changes that led me to make the switch, I guess. And does anyone have any, if anyone wants to jump in, I'm about to switch into the new project here. So that's kind of my segue.
I'm excited for it.
Okay. So let me go to the new site here. This is still, you like that little slide in?
Swanky, yeah.
This is my Wes Anderson fanboy kicking in here. This is the right frame rate. If you watch Grand Budapest Hotel, you're gonna see that slide in on the titles. So I'm still moving content in. So this is just kind of a mock-up for the homepage. The homepage I've never known what to do with. I don't like the homepage. Nobody who comes into your site these days, they're almost always coming in on a direct link from Twitter or a search result or something. So, but I have to find a way to make a good impression. So this is me starting. And I'm trying to build on all this stuff. So going to the blog, I'm still doing this thing where comments or notes, as I call them, are in amongst the rest of the site. So where did I go? I went all the way to the bottom. Here. This is a note that's on another article. So I've developed my own nomenclature so I can keep it straight in my head. I call them articles because of the big idea of this whole thing existing both on the web and someday soon, hopefully, in print from the same source. So in my mind, it's not a website. It's a thing, but I'm not calling them posts. In my mind, I'm trying to make myself think of these things as being the print edition and the web edition as being equal citizens. So this is a note to an article. You can see it's regarding this article. So if you click on here, you'll go to the article. But this is just that note. Might get rid of that. And then, so in the margin, you see there is a note appended. You click on it, you'll scroll down, you see the note. If you go back here, if you go back to the blog, if you click, I don't know how obvious this is. I'm still trying to figure out how much I care about discoverability and things like that. But if you click on the actual permalink over there, you go right to the note at the bottom, and then you can scroll up and see the rest of it. And then there are some pages here to illustrate the series aspect. Let's see here. I'm trying to find one. It's part of a series. Actually, I've just remembered I only have 2 series. I had a bunch of test content on here that I have since moved out, since I'm trying to make it really real now. So marquee fiction, if I go back, that's probably one of the older ones. So here, this is one of those marquee fiction pieces, 256 characters. If you encounter it in the blog, you'll see this marginal text. This is an invention, part of marquee fiction. And as I'm expanding this idea of series, the series has its own kind of presentation details, but it also has kind of these invisible characteristics that propagate downward into the children articles. And so the series has kind of a noun singular and a noun plural. So if you notice on the home page, this says inventions, and the individual articles are uninvention. So I can specify that phrase for the series as a whole, and any articles that I assign to that series will kind of get that designation. This is kind of an artifact of, you can see I'm still dealing with, when you're at the article, you want that marginal text, but when you're on the series page, you don't want to see the reiteration. This is part of marquee fiction. This is part of marquee fiction. This is part of so I'm trying to hide that, but I got to figure out how to hide that little manicule when I'm on there. So that's series. That's kind of a brief introduction to series. One of the other aspects is you'll notice there are no titles on these. There's no title specified in the original source either. It's just, at least I don't think so. And that's where I can get to, if the source for the article is checked into version control, you'll see these little links up here. I just recently put these in. If I click on this one, I can go to the source code for the article. And so that's the Pollen source code. This is the, and I'll get into this too, but this is the version control system for this. It's kind of live you know, if I make edits, they show up here as long as I check them in. Because it's possible to publish an article without having checked it into version control necessarily. So when I build the site, it kind of runs a command in the background to see if this article has been checked in yet. If it was, then it adds these two links on here. If you click on the other one, oh, go ahead.
This was the bit you were talking about earlier with some parts still being in the database and others still being. Yeah.
Well, sort of, yeah. I'll get into the underlying aspects of that as well.
Okay.
Then if I click here, this is change. This cent sign is my pun on change. Then you'll see the complete update history. So you can actually click 2 dots here and get a diff. That's not terribly obvious, but you can view the old version of the file. You notice my keywords aren't there in that one. So, I mean, there's more nerdiness showing up here that the tool that I'm using to support this fossil, I can't get rid of all of it. I would like it to be a little cleaner, but you know, for example, I would like to get rid of this whole bullet point up here. I'm not, that's just going to confuse people who are looking at this, and I never use it. So I'd much rather they just see this and this. And unfortunately, the underlying HTML is only sporadically marked up with classes and things that you can use CSS selectors on. Otherwise, I would just do a, you know, visibility hidden or something like that on there. Some of these things don't show up if you're not logged in, so you wouldn't see this information in the background there.
Gotcha.
So that's part of the that's part of the on the viewing marginal changes. I still hope to have I want to kind of preserve all of the errata down here from the old site. I kind of probably make a bunch of other little articles that preserve all this information. I'll put that out of the way somewhere. But then that errata page will also have, if I go to you can see the entire history of the entire code base. Some of these changes, if I'm consistent, errata. So this shows all check-ins with that tag, or commits, you might say in GitHub parlance, with that tag. So that would be able to link to this, and people will be able to see more. You know, again, this is maybe something that only those of us in the select cabal would care about, but this is the kind of thing that makes web publishing fun for me. So, and then there is the example finally of, let me go back to the site. I'm gonna have to scroll around here for it. Okay, so that whole idea of updating an older article that you no longer agree with, or for whatever reason, I've created this notion that instead of comments, I call them notes, and I have them down here as before, further notes, and I've fleshed that out a little bit so that a note can have a disposition. So if a note has a disposition, it changes it changes the presentation of the article. You can have a symbol that appears at the top. You can have a phrase that describes your new disposition towards this article. And both the symbol and the phrase will link to the note that created the new condition.
Gotcha.
So this was back when I was in high school. I believed that all poetry should rhyme. If it didn't rhyme, it was stupid. And I wrote a long thing about this, and I don't know. I was pretty good at spinning it out, I think, into a wall of text or whatever. But years later, I don't agree with it anymore. But I want to keep the old thing. I want the old things to show the evolution. I want to preserve the changes. I want people to see the changes. They want to go digging for them. It should be fun to explore. So then I can add a note. It has a disposition, and if there's more than, I could add another note after this one with its own disposition. It'll just take whatever the last one was. And that's the one that we'll present at the top of the article.
Are there other dispositions you've used in here other than the like views changed deprecated one?
I would like to see, that's the thing is once I get going, there are other ones I have in mind. Like I mentioned earlier, like sometimes I make, this isn't unusual, but sometimes I might make a long shot prediction. And if I feel like it's a prediction that nobody else is making and I can back up a little bit, I might, and it feels original, then I might write it down. And if it later gets proven false or true, I think that would be fun to be able to see.
Totally.
And then you could have a long list of them. You'd be able to see which ones have green check marks and which ones have big red X's on them. So
nice.
I'm not going to stand well, but it's not gonna reveal me to be any kind of.
And can you have more than one disposition per post? So I'm imagining, like you're saying, like you said, this is the long shot, and then it's also that's a deprecated.
Yeah.
It's like, or it could be like, it's a long shot and I told you so. That was that's my one disposition.
I could have, what I would do, I guess in that case, I would try and create a single compound disposition, I guess. So if you look at the source code, we're going down here. I don't have any syntax highlighting set up for this yet. That's not very high on my list, but it is something I want. But you can see here's the note tag, there's the date, and then I've created a disposition. So the disposition is basically just a string value with whatever comes before the first space is the disposition mark, and then whatever comes after that space is used as the phrase. So I could have a red X and an exclamation point and a double dagger and deprecated comma, but also I told you so. So that could be done for sure. If I create another note, so this note starts here, if I follow the parens, it ends way down here. I could type in another one further down, whatever. If that one had a disposition, it would just replace the one that I made.
So it's always red. You can't make like a yellow.
Yeah, no, at this point it's just always, and that's again, my color palette is pretty sparing here. I have some ideas for changing that. This header symbol, my wife she can do pretty great watercolor. She did the watercolor for this.
Oh.
That I've been using for years. I tried it; it just didn't feel right. I like it. I would keep using it. It's a beehive. Not everybody gets that. That's part of maybe a little bit of the downside, but it's got the yarn, what have you. But my wife has got almost finished a watercolor version of this, where the roses are little balls of yarn. So that'll make things a little nicer to look at. But again, yeah, it's pretty much. I haven't fully decided when I'm using green and red links either. The green links are kind of like leaves on the vine, I guess, so they're actual nodes on the graph. Whereas, but again, I'm not fully consistent there. Still getting there.
Sweet.
Okay. Boy, I feel like I'm tearing through, but it's been an hour already. So that's kind of at a high kind of design level, what I'm about here.
Do we get to dig into the build system now?
Yeah, we can get into that quick. And then also here's the keynotes or the keyword index. I've been able to add in some additional functionality where I can have sub entries. And these are also kind of, every time I regenerate the site, these numbers end up different, but maybe once I'm done kind of migrating all the content, they'll stabilize. But I don't think people care. It doesn't really matter. So if you click on one of these, it'll actually, now on that one, I have a kind of a keyword that applies to the post as a whole. But if you click on, for example, frogs, it'll actually highlight the specific entry here that links there. So I can jump all the way down.
And that's marked up in the code of this post. Okay.
Yeah, I'll explain that in a bit. One thing I also forgot that's cool, that's kind of a feature of Pollen being built on a complete Lisp programming language, is you'll recall the notes are they're contained within their articles. So I can find it again here. So here's a note. If I look at if I go to the article and I look at the source, you'll see the source for the entire article. And here's that note, right? So, but when you're in the blog and you encounter the note all by itself, that also has its own source. And when you click on that, it actually, well, it knows. Sometimes it scrolls to it, but you see it's highlighted the line in the source where it appears. Pollen is based on Racket, which is its whole reason for existence is it's a programming language. So it's a programming language that you can use to design programming languages. And so when you're in each of these articles is in fact a Racket program. And all the syntax you create kind of knows, where in the source code it lives. So I'm able to kind of carry that information all the way through and highlight that specific line.
Nice.
There would be other ways to do that too. It's not like you could never do it any other way. You could easily, have a regular expression and grep for the thing you're looking for in the source. That could work too. But I like the way that I'm doing it.
It's clean.
Yeah, conceptually clean. So, okay, so we're going to get into behind the scenes. So in behind the scenes, you'll notice it's /code in the URL. If you go to /code, you'll come here. This is actually a fossil repository. If you're familiar with GitHub, it's very similar, or with Git proper, it's very similar to Git. But fossil is more self-contained. So the fossil program is a single binary file. If you just copy that binary, if you just download that binary program and stick it on your path on your web server, you can use it to serve up a repository. And you can have user accounts, grant privileges. In fact, so I'll show you what it's like in my command line here. Let me just embiggen. I'm going to go to if I go here, this is a fossil repository. On my prompt, I've got a fancy customized prompt. You can see it knows that I'm on a fossil repository, and this is what branch I'm on. If I type in fossil, status, it knows that I'm in a repository. Now, but fossil also has, unlike Git, it has its own built-in web interface. So if I type fossil UI, it's going to, well, hang on, I'm running a competing web service here. Hang on. So let me try again here. So this is an older version of this. This is my local copy of the same thing that you're looking at over here.
Oh, whoa.
So if you do this on your local machine, and I've already customized this, this is an older version of the theme, but because it's my local copy, I haven't updated my local copy with the new theme. So it's fully themable. And so you can look at the complete timeline in your web browser on your local machine. You can look at the ticketing. It has its own ticketing. So it's all built into the repository. Unlike with Git, Git doesn't really provide issues. You have to use GitHub for that. With a fossil repository, the tickets are part of the repository. If you want to use them, you can. You don't have to. It has its own wiki, so you can create wiki pages within the repository. And then on I'll just go ahead and end this. So on my particular copy, the whole repository lives in this file right here. That's the repository. On Git creates a subdirectory called .git, so a hidden subdirectory where it keeps all of the versioning changes. This is just a file that has everything in it, and that is actually if you're familiar with SQLite or SQLite, it's just an SQLite database file.
They have the same creator, right? Or am I
yes, exactly. Okay. So the creator of SQLite created Fossil to do his own version control for SQLite. So
gotcha.
If I list that file, let's see here. That file is 3.9 megabytes. Has all my changes. It even has a lot, and most of that is taken up by actually a couple of the images that I have included in the repository. So that's what's going on there. So what you're seeing I've just shown you the local interface there. What you're seeing on the website is just the same thing happening on my web server.
Did you have to do a lot of fighting to get it to look and work like this, or was it pretty like easily themable?
It took a lot of tinkering, I would say. I never felt like I was fighting it.
Okay.
It has, if you're logged into the repository, you can go to admin skins. It has it's also everything you can do is kind of self-documenting. So you can initialize a draft skin, and then you can edit the CSS, the header, the footer, the details, any JavaScript you want included, and then you can test it, because anything you access at draft 1 will use whatever draft skin you have in process.
Wow.
And so I went through a couple of iterations before I decided to make it try and match the rest of the site pretty closely.
Yeah.
And so, but if you know CSS, it's just kind of another fun CSS adventure. So however you feel about that. And you can't customize everything. I'm running into an issue, for example, where if you go to code, the default settings, it uses kind of a column here, but whoops, if I go to articles, they're all kind of colliding with each other. So that's just one of those things I haven't got around to fixing. But you can look at the tree view, and that looks nice. I probably will eventually just fix this at 2 columns. That should be enough. There's maybe for getting things to break evenly into columns like this, I haven't found a good replacement in Flexbox or Grid or anything, but I also haven't looked that hard.
Gotcha.
So there's all kinds of things you can do here. That's as far as I'll go into the fossil side of things for now. But what I like about it is that it does all these things. I can make it look the same as everything, and I can incorporate it into the rest of the site. And it's also just easy to administer. I don't have to have a MySQL instance running on my server. I don't have to keep a database backup. So for this piece of it, I'm very happy with how that's working.
Awesome.
Okay, Pollen.
Yeah.
Sorry it took so long to get here. Pollen is really great. When I first discovered Pollen, I was still thinking in Markdown terms. So let me go back here. Bookmaking machine. I think this is where I finally started to get it, but I was still thinking of it in terms of, okay, who's this guy? He's kind of dunking on Markdown, which is, as far as I know, the only game in town. Why do I want this? Well, I think of Pollen as essentially a document transformation or a document processing language where you have complete control over the tool. You have complete control over the syntax. So the way a Pollen project works is, as I've written here, you decide what kind of semantics your documents need, what kind of things you want to be able to depict, even at a very high level. And then you decide what kind of markup you want to use. And then you decide what that markup produces in any output format. So I can have that markup produce a different output when I'm targeting HTML versus when I'm targeting, LaTeX. Or I could, I used to be very convinced. What would you say? What's the investing term? I used to be long on ebooks, so I thought ebooks were the future. But at the time I started, and it's still a possibility, if I get into a low enough level to where I can generate an EPUB by hand, which is very possible in theory, I could target that as well. I could generate an ebook from the same source. So here's an example document. Maybe you've seen it already. But I decided, okay, for this particular example, I wanted hyperlinks to look this way. I wanted to be able to typeset poetry the way that Bringhurst tells me to, which should be centered on the page on the longest line. Good luck doing that in Markdown without using HTML. So it's easy to do in LaTeX, but again, it's the HTML. It's always one or the other medium is lacking. I could get it. You can get it to work in either, but now you have a single source that can generate and do the tricks that you need on either side. So the way I have this working is, we'll go back into here now. And then I also have, I don't know if you've used make files before, but I have a make file that is kind of my operational interface into all this. If I type make, it's going to say, oh, okay, these are the things you can do. It's like a text adventure. You can make an article. If I type make publish, it publishes the site. If I type make scribble, it rebuilds the code documentation, which I haven't talked about yet. If I type make web, it'll rebuild all the web content that needs making. I think right now, there's nothing I need to do. But if I were to edit any of these source code files, that's what make files do, is they keep track of, okay, you've changed one thing, what else needs to be updated? Let's go ahead and I have, all of my articles are stored in the articles subdirectory. So there they all are. The poly.pm is the source code, the HTML is the output. And I can type, I use Vim because that's what I ended up landing on. Probably go to Emacs one of these days because it has a lot of great Racket tools, but articles. Let's do what's a good one here? I could do the same article we were just looking at, pollen targets. So here's my article. I don't have a lot of affordances here under this very light syntax highlighting. I can change to a dark theme, change the font a little bit, and edit it. This is basically what you saw in the source code that I showed you on the fossil repository. And you can, what's nice about the syntax is it's possible to typeset Pollen source code within Pollen without doing a whole ton of escaping. So it knows to typeset this bit as literal text, not as Pollen code. And that's part of kind of how what's called the reader works. This symbol is the symbol that tells Pollen. It's kind of the built-in way to tell Pollen, hey, here's some code coming up. So anything that follows the lozenge, I don't know how to pronounce that, lozenge, is as an identifier, and then in this case, I'm telling it, okay, everything after, because I've used a pipe and a curly bracket here, it's going to interpret everything that follows as a string until it gets to the closing curly bracket and pipe down here. So that's just an example. Behind the scenes, if you're familiar with Lisp, this translates into essentially this. But the difference is that in this format, I can follow it up with the curly brackets, and the curly brackets if anything within the curly brackets is interpreted as a string. So if I type hello, then I don't have to type quotes around it. It's the same thing as doing this in Lisp. If I type, but then I can also include, I can include some more code in there, and that will get spliced in as another function call to the addition function. So it's a little bit gnarly to get used to, but it doesn't take much tinkering to get it, to grok it. And but then you really have to fully get on board with everything you're doing is code, really. There's some affordances in here so that if you're just typing text, it's easy to just type text. But as soon as you need some code, you realize you're really dealing with code here.
Are there ways of doing, you said before that the standard way of doing the inputting code is with the lozenge. Are there other ways of telling it that code is coming up? Or?
Yeah, it's the world is your oyster. So you can do, if you don't like the lozenge, you can customize it to be a different symbol on a per project basis. It could be the @ sign, it Could be something just that you know that's easy to type, but that's not going to show up in your text. If I want to actually a lozenge to show up in my text, I have to do this.
Huh.
So, but that's not hard to do, and I almost never need to type lozenge. Or
Yeah.
I can do the trick up here, or where did I put it? Down here. So these lozenges are showing up as text because they're inside this hyper escaped, I don't know what to call it, pipe curly bracket. So that's another way of doing that. Now, as far as what if you don't, the whole notion of having an escape character and then dropping into a function call, it doesn't have to work that way. It's a little more work, but it's just straightforward programming. If I want to do string processing and have anything within 2 asterisks to show up as bold, I can do that as well.
And that would be by modifying the reader or making your own reader?
No, it's kind of, well, let's get into a little bit. We'll talk about, and I'm just going to do it very lightly, but Pollen has really great documentation, and I didn't really get it until I actually just went through the tutorials and typed things out, and I really encourage you to do that. If you like this kind of stuff, it'll be fun. You'll be a better programmer when you're done. And I know I was. I'm learning so much. It's really mind-bending to begin with. But you go through the tutorials and they're really well written. But these are the source documents, Lang Pollen. Now, what's behind that? If I go to, I'm back here, my big one, my main one. You'll see the .rkt files. Those are Racket source code modules, just like a .c is a C. The way Pollen works is, well, let me back up a sec. The way Racket works is, at the beginning of every Racket program, you tell it what language you're using. So for example, I happen to have this up from earlier, but Racket has a slideshow language. So if I'm in Racket's editor and I tell it I wanted to use Pollen's reader so that I'm using Pollen-like syntax, but the actual language I'm using is slideshow. And then I tell it, okay, this is a slide. Well, if I run that program, then I get a slide. I get a slideshow. So you can, if you're willing to do the work, you can design a little programming language to do anything you want. So this is the ecosystem that Pollen comes into. And now I have to remember how to quit. So I happen to have that up. So Pollen, I'm telling Racket I'm using Pollen. Pollen has its own things, okay. And what a Racket language does for you is it basically builds in all these conveniences behind the scenes. Just like including, if you're doing a Python, if you include a module, it's going to give you all these functions to use. Well, a Racket program, a Racket language is going to give you functions to use. It's also going to give you syntax to use. It's also going to give you a bunch of automatic work that it does. So the automatic work that Pollen does is it automatically includes this pollen.racket module in every single one of your documents. So that's where all these functions are coming from. Each of these tags is a function that I've defined that operates on everything, on all of its arguments. And that function can tell what the target source format is. Let me bring up Pollen. My pollen.racket is a little bit complicated because I'm doing the multi format thing. I've written a macro called polybranch tag that does a lot of work for me. So, again, this is a little bit complicated, but let's just follow it through.
Yeah.
In my source code file, sorry, I'll switch over here. I have an OL tag right here. Okay, that function comes from pollen.racket. Right here, well, polybranch tag. Well, in this case, I've written a macro that says, okay, when this polybranch tag appears with an identifier, then set up a bunch of variables and then have that actually translate into this Racket source code. So it's actually kind of a macro that expands to a function definition. So what it's expanding to is a definition of the OL function. And what this OL function is going to do is switch. It's going to call a different function depending on the current target output format. That's what this function call here gets me. So right here, you can see it's kind of a format string. The first bit of the format, the tilde A, is HTML because I'm targeting HTML, and the second is the actual tag name. So it's actually going to target the HTML OL function. So that's what. And when I'm targeting PDF, it's going to target the PDF OL function. So I'm going to get different output. So it's going to call either one of these functions depending on what output format I have. And where does that function come from? Well, I'm requiring another module here called tags HTML. So if I open that one up, I get another one here, and this is where I'm providing all these HTML. See, you'll notice the HTML prefix. So HTML, well, I did another one up here. This one is actually being provided here, and it's being defined. In fact, I think what I'll do is I'll open this file in the Racket editor because it's fancier. The Racket editor, you can hover over things and tell it'll identify where things are coming from. Where did I do this OL function? Oh, you know what I did? So OL is really kind of a stupid, simple function. It's just, basically all it does is it spits out the HTML tag,
yeah,
containing, well, it actually spits out, it works out, it's pretty close. I could do it here. I could do the equivalent if I was doing it the canonical way. So I do HTML OL and then dot elements. What this does is this dot makes this a variadic function, so you can call it with any number of arguments, which means I can include any number of elements inside that. And then what I'm going to spit out is a OL, and then I realize this all sounds faintly ridiculous, so just bear with me. And this is all very well explained in the tutorials, but I stick out, this is called an X expression. One of the insights of using Lisp with HTML is that this parentheses syntax actually really lines up well with HTML. In HTML, we type OL and then something, and then we have a closing tag. In Lisp, you can make that into a function that has SSDF, whatever, and then close parentheses. Close parentheses functions as your closing tag. So now, instead of just having a text markup with tags on either side, you have a function call. And then if this is the expression that you produce, this could also be the result expression. So this is actually what is the result of my function is this expression, and then you can convert that to HTML with the function HTML, and then the result of that function. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of I don't know if anyone has any questions. This is kind of weird.
I mean, I think we could probably dig into the Racket Pollen stuff for a while. Yeah.
Do we want to go deeper or kind of continue on to the book stuff, or
I think I'd definitely be really interested in the book stuff. I don't know what people's time schedules are, right? But we are 23 minutes over what I originally put out for this. Maybe get into the book stuff and then we can finish up after that.
Yeah, I think the book stuff would make sense just because I think then that would be the incentive, to really get into the weeds with Pollen, as I'm sure it was for you, Joel, just to kind of okay, now I have a mastery of this. Now look what I can do with it.
Yeah, and a lot of this, what I've done is presenting as much more complicated than what a typical Pollen project would need to be. Pollen was made for books. So the idea is, and you maybe have seen the author's website, practicaltypography.com. He uses Pollen to publish this book. So it's a set of chapters, and the chapters really don't change much. And I've adapted it to my website, which is more of a kind of a amorphous, ever-growing, infinite collection of stuff that needs to know about each other. So I've made it more complicated, and I've also tried to document all this. If you go to the /code and you click on code docs, I've created documentation, which is easy to create, relatively speaking, using another Racket language called Scribble, which was specifically designed for documenting Racket code. So in Scribble, these are all the, I can typeset some code, and any function, if you click on that function, you'll go to its documentation. So everything's cross-referenced. It's really handy. Racket has the best, for a documentation nerd, Racket has the best documentation system I've ever encountered. And in fact, if you click on any of the functions that are referenced, they're not even part of my project. They're part of they're part of Racket itself, or part of another package. For example, this define meta is part of Pollen. Well, if you click on that, you're going to go to the documentation for Pollen. There's the definition. If you click on require or module, these are basic Racket keywords. You're going to go for those definitions right in the Racket, the main Racket reference. It has a way of interlinking everything together. So here we got wheels within wheels, so to speak. Anyways, you can look at this and you can see how these are my goals. I've tried to justify to myself why I made it as complicated as I did. Books. So after I realized what Pollen could do, I had to kind of, they say create one to throw away. So I created this website in Pollen called what I called the Secretary of Foreign Relations. So this was just a big, ugly, throwaway prototype. Ugly in terms of I'm doing a lot of things here that don't really relate to each other. But I think of a secretary in terms of like a piece of furniture that you use to organize your stuff. And foreign relations, well, writing is relating to people who are not you. So that was where that went. And so I made this, and I made it so that every page in this site, you can look at the source code for it. This is a precursor. But then I made it so that it would generate the LaTeX needed to generate a PDF in more or less the same format. And it does smart things like including URLs in the margins instead of hiding them as footnotes, and all that kind of stuff. So I created this. This was my thing. That's like, okay, yes, this proves that I can do it. And then as part of that, I took this old book, Flatland, and kind of ported it over to Pollen. I used the highest resolution illustrations I could find, and made a book edition of that as well. So you can look at a PDF of an individual page, or you can download the complete book, or you can go on to I don't know if this link works anymore because CreateSpace doesn't exist anymore. It's all over to Amazon Kindle Publishing now, but I should update that. You can order it on Amazon. If you search for it, you'll find it. I did update it here. Right here, you can go here and get it. So this just has an ugly cover that I created in CreateSpace's make a cover online template tool. So I'm not especially proud of the cover, but it's a cheap proof of concept. And surprisingly, maybe about 12 people a month order this edition of this book.
Wow.
So that's made me very happy. Do my little Mr. Bean smile every time I get that royalty for like, $8 or whatever.
Did it say the paperback edition was only $5?
Yeah, I think it still is $5.38 in the US.
Wow.
I think it translates into something else in euros, and actually most of the people who buy it in euros. So I don't know what happened. Maybe somebody at a college found out about it or something. I don't know.
Wow.
Then I decided, well, okay, now I know I can do a book. Can I do a blog? And this is where it goes back all the way back to Jared's very first question of the family of websites. I took an old blog that I had on Blogspot and I made it into a Pollen project, and to see if I could do it. And it can be done. So then I knew that could be done. And on any of these, you can, I think this still works. You can get the PDF. I'm not really proud of the look of the PDF on this, but I just wanted to see if it would work. You can see the very similar kind of source code there. And then if you want, you can see the history of that page on GitHub, because that's a Git project. So then I thought, okay, now I have a blog. I can make books. I can make print books. I can make blogs. We're not really happy with the covers. So at this point, I'm still learning Racket. And so as part of doing that and doing this, I did wrote a Racket language that I hope to revisit and expand, but it does what I needed to do. A Racket language for making book covers.
Huh.
So if you go, let's see if I can get to a quick link here. I'm just going to go right to for the web. I can just get anywhere from anywhere. Open in its own tab. Pollen, I'm going to go up. And okay, so I published this package. If you go to Racket's documentation, you'll see way down here, book cover, generating PDFs for book covers. So I wrote this language because I don't want to be designing book covers. If I'm going to be making print books, I've got to make print book covers, and those are pretty fiddly to make because if you design one, you'll see you've got to make it the right width, and the spine has to wrap all the way around, and the spine has to be the right thickness for the number of pages that are in your book. And anytime you add or remove pages, you got to recalculate that or regenerate it. So what happens is with Lang book cover, you tell it what the inside the PDF for the inside of your book looks like, and then you kind of do some drawing commands. It's kind of like responsive design. I can anchor these things to, I want this title to be, I don't know why I put 2/6, but basically 1/3 of the way from the top, centered horizontally. And then for convenience, I'm outlining the spine and the bleed, and then it will spit out another PDF file that contains this. And you can use this directly with a print-on-demand service. Say, this is my book cover. And if you change your book, you edit it, it'll expand or reduce the spine if the number of pages changes, or if you need to use a different formula to calculate the width of the spine. So I could go into that for a long time, but that was another tool that I made. And then in order to really test that out, I made a book with it called the Dice Word Book. If you've seen the Dice Word list, it's kind of like a method for creating secure passwords. You roll a dice. Let's see here. You look at it, it's basically a list of words. You roll a dice. I got 11224. So the first word in my password is activator. So I decided to make a book of that, and I used that book cover to generate, all that you see on the cover here is just code. So make some rectangles, rotate them, draw another one. So now I can do that. So where I'm at with the local yarn is I know I can do everything I need to. I haven't actually got around to typesetting everything yet because for two reasons. One, I need the website. I need the website to be live first. I need to have something to make into a book. The other reason is I'm really hoping to not have to use LaTeX. I really hate LaTeX. It produces great output, but it is really gnarly to look at. Let's just go to.
So were those previous books typeset in LaTeX?
They were indeed. If we go to, I'll go to my GitHub repo. I'll show you the code for the Secretary of Foreign Relations thing that it's right there. I should have just clicked on it. Back. Try Pollen. It's repo is called Try Pollen. All the code for that is on here. And if you go to pollen.racket on this one, let's find an example. So let's see, here's the function. This is much more concise because I'm not using all these convenience mechanisms it's just a single function. So I have a tag called margin figure. I want to put an illustration in the margin. And then it takes as arguments the source code for the source for the image, just like a source in an HTML image tag. And then any number of arguments that are rolled up into a list called caption. And then I'm branching out here. if I'm targeting LaTeX or PDF, then it produces this expression, which is basically a kind of a text. I've called it TXT, which just all it does is contain a bunch of strings. And the only reason I did it that way is because I wanted to be able to do a little extra manipulation on them at the very end. But so here it's producing the LaTeX that I want for the PDF output. There's the beginning tag, include the graphics, and then it kind of escapes in the source that I want there. And then the caption, and then I have a function to kind of make sure that I haven't included any hyperlinks in the caption itself, because for various reasons with the LaTeX thing I'm using, those will screw up the page. And then there's the end tag. Now with Pollen, so this is the function that you call in the source code, and with Pollen, it'll spit this out. And then if we go back here, or back to, I had to open the text pattern editor. What happens in the source is that you have these tags. This is back in the source document. This is a function call. So what's going to happen is this function is going to get called with its arguments, and then this function will be, and then this function will be. And when those are done, this function is going to be called with whatever resulted from those in there. And so kind of all these functions get called as you, it's just like when you're working with parentheses in math, all the inner expressions kind of get resolved, and then the outer ones, and then the outer ones, and the outer ones. And then Pollen has an implicit function called root. And that root function gets to do whatever it wants with the final results. So then I'm doing all these passes. This tells it, okay, for every string that's still left in this thing, call this function to do any LaTeX escaping, set up any smart quotes, set up any smart dashes if I'm using, 2 dashes to make it an N hyphen, or 3 dashes to make it an M hyphen. It's doing all that fancy pants stuff, text processing, to get the final LaTeX document looking great. And then at the bottom, so then it makes this thing, and then it runs it through a template file, and the template file provides what's, let me CDP into, I'm going to git repo. There's the template for the PDF file, template.pdf.p. And that is a big old LaTeX template.
Ooh.
That can also, with these lozenges, escape into some Pollen source code. So you can see why I don't like LaTeX. LaTeX is kind of black magic to begin with. I'd never really understood the syntax. I've always just Googled what I needed to do to get done. And this is exactly the kind of thing that I eventually hope to get away from, just like I was with Textpattern and XSLT and all that stuff. So, so that's what that kind of all evaluates out to. And then it does some stuff at the end here to actually run the XE LaTeX command and produce the PDF. The end result is it spits out a bunch of bytes, and then it saves those bytes into a PDF file. So that's kind of at a high level how that works. And that will produce a very nice looking book if you have your LaTeX all right. The same guy who wrote Pollen is now working on, find my tab here and just start a new one. A new typesetting language called Quad, specifically for PDFs.
Ooh.
So he's still working on this, and so I'm hoping that this will soon be ready enough for me to make a book with. It's actually not, it's quite a bit of ways away, but he has written his own PDF writer. He did a lot of, turtles all the way down kind of stuff even to get to this point.
Yeah.
But you can see that it's another language like Lang Pollen's Lang Quad Writer. If you want to just recreate a PDF this way, I think he has an example here. Example output. Maybe he has revised them away, but I think I can do this now. Let me just take QuadWriter / Markdown, copy and paste that into a new Racket program. let's see here. Have I not installed Quad on this machine? I can just do Quad. I'll come back to that. That's going to happen in the background. But anyways, you can, it has a kind of a bunch of defaults, and then you can use more expressions to set all the options for it. So this is much nicer to work with than LaTeX. The downside is that LaTeX has all these macros and facilities for doing footnotes and for doing, I don't know, columns and doing, well, Quad has columns right now too, but,
Yeah.
you know, so right now Quad is to the point where we're ready to write that, next level of functionality. It already can produce, it already has the level of typesetting that LaTeX has in terms of kerning and hanging indentation or hanging punctuation and the word breaking algorithm that LaTeX uses, the Dalton-Knuth hyphenation.
Is this like, would this then generate LaTeX, or does it go straight to generating?
It passes right through to its own layer. I think he has a description here of the stack, but let's see here. Basically, it goes through his own, every library that it gets through to become a PDF is another Racket library. So it's starting from scratch.
Wow.
And Matthew Buderick, who wrote this, is himself a typographer. So
yeah,
he's not only a good programmer, but he appreciates what needs to happen for good typography. So that's what makes this great. There's another possibility that is kind of in a race with Quad, which is headless Chrome. If you could use Chrome and just to load up the appropriate CSS and HTML representation of what you want, and then have it create a PDF, then that's another way you could do it without having to mess with LaTeX. But it's not, as you know, you're getting the same degree of typesetting quality you would get from a browser, which isn't good enough for books, in my opinion. It would be good enough for a basic book, but I want it to look really, really nice because I'm a freaking perfectionist. So waiting for one of these tools to catch up to LaTeX in terms of pure typesetting quality. But my next step is to, and if you kind of, I'll try and make a note to give you the RSS feed for code updates. But if you go to the code portion of the site, I'll just go back there. You can get an RSS feed of this if you want to kind of see it in your reader whenever I'm doing something. But that kind of my next step is to get the site running, get all my old content over, and as I'm going, I'm adding new tag functions. And then if Quad's not ready by that point, I'm just going to whip up some LaTeX templates, and hopefully I can reuse most of what I've done in the other projects and not have to start from scratch, and use all the same, but use the fonts from the new site and use the typesetting conventions from the new site. So
awesome.
And then the idea is, just as for now, when I'm in local yarn, I can do, let's just do make article. This runs a little Racket script, asks me for a title, and I'll just type in A. I have to have a title because it has to have a file name. That's the only place I really need a title. But if I want, I can just delete this line. And it already has the date here. It already has the copyright line in case I want to do a Creative Commons or whatever. I can conceal the article from a given context. So if I don't want it to show up in the feed, or I don't want to show up in the blog, it'll still have its own page, but you just won't see it from any of those places. Or you could conceal it from the keyword index. And then I'm just going to my article. I'm going to delete this conceal line because okay, there. Now I've saved it. Now if I type make web, it notices the new file, and renders it. I apologize. I should have gotten here way sooner. But, and then it knows because it's a make file, it knows, okay, well, that was a dependency of that. So let's regenerate the blog. And then also we probably need to regenerate the keyword index, even though I didn't really define any new keyword index entries. It could be a little bit smart about that, but it only takes a few milliseconds. And then it does some tidying. So then I can do make publish, and it just does an rsync from my local machine up to the live site. So then we go back here. We can quickly get back to the prototype, go to the blog. There's my article.
Nice.
I haven't checked it in yet, so it's not showing up. Those links aren't showing up here. And if you go to that, and then if we, well, let me go to it in Firefox because it's a little, oh, I'm not doing the live site there. That was my local instance. I'm going to type, and I go to the blog, I go to here, and then we want to look at the source. There's a step in there that kind of tidies it all up, so it's easy to look at. If you're looking at the raw HTML, nobody but us five is ever going to see that, but that's kind of the way. So the idea is that, and I know this will work because I've done it on the other sites, but there will be an additional target here for PDF. It'll rebuild all those PDF files, type make PDFs. I'm also going to have to design a way to, because there's going to be more than one book that comes out of this. So there will be a way to
split them up.
There'll probably be a subfolder called books, and each one of those will have its own, probably its own make file, and which will not have to be nearly as complex. And I'll just type make, and it'll regenerate the book and the cover and everything. If any of you know of a book publishing site that has an API, let me know. I haven't
Brendan?
really found one.
I don't think I know of one yet. I've seen there's a couple sites that are like book kind of publishing platforms based on Git repos. It's probably the closest one I could think of.
It seems like, the trouble is that there's not a lot of money in publishing books, even print-on-demand books, especially because Amazon already does it so stinking well. So it's kind of like with ebooks, it's kind of stuck at wherever Amazon cares to leave it.
Yeah.
Ideally, the state of the art would be there would have an API and I could upload it and there would be a new book there. But for now, I have to manually log into Amazon and upload my PDF like an animal. But ideally, that's, I mean, and I've even looked for, machines. Maybe I can print them myself. But there's no way. It's just not going to happen. I don't have space for it. Someday, maybe. But that's what's going. That's kind of where things are at.
That's awesome.
I don't know. So my video preview window of wherever you guys are hanging out can't see you anymore. So
okay, I think I'll just end the recording here.
Yeah, sounds good.
That was awesome. That was super interesting. Makes me really want to do a bunch of Racket and Pollen experiments. Thank you a ton.
Yeah, sure.